We are back with another session of Evolve with Paperclip. Let's dive right in.
So the whole session about, right? So it's also going to be about the introduction of design tokens. So this is just as a starting point. And the whole session will be in a way that we'll also have a 45 minutes presentation and we'll have a Q&A as well after that. And meanwhile, also, if we have any questions in between, feel free to drop in the chat as well. So if it is lining up with the section, we'll take it up, or we'll also take it up in the end. And Moxie will take a note of all those questions and we'll get back to them as well. So yeah, let's start to the introduction of design tokens. So before starting the introduction, right, let's think about the scenario before design tokens even came into picture, right? So let's say, just imagine that you have this brand color and it is going to be used in various things, right? Might be used in your website, your product, your mobile applications, and maybe even a few components as well, right? So these are just like a tiny set of components. These are not the only ones which might be used, but just for an example, maybe we have buttons, tick boxes, radio buttons, inputs, etc., which are like our basic components as well. And so if they are also like transformed into the code, this is how also might the color values be stored in a raw CSS format. So see how every color and every code is also hard coded into a specific element. So let's say for now, everything looks very good and like even so far, right? But it won't come to a point when it also happens to this scenario, that until one fine day, all of those colors just drastically change over a time. So what might be the reasons behind that? So like many people are involved in the design and development process. Then let's say if some people, there's no proper documentation usage, then people just might come up with their very own similar set of shades just to serve their purpose. Or also there's no single source of truth as well. And there's just spares just spending too much time into identifying the mistakes, correcting them, and at the end ending up with a complete rebrand altogether. So I think that is something which we might need to take care about as well. So what are the challenges also which are faced so far till now, right? Let's say it's also the challenge about scaling the whole design to multiple techs and platforms. Now, even like we are having the same application in our Androids, in our iOS, and even a same web version is also available. So it is also a problem in scaling the same design language across all the different platforms. Then also, even if it is done throughout the different platforms, you also need to keep a track of it, right? Because let's say if there are different environments, they also need to follow a similar brand language and also have a brand consistency. So that is one of the biggest business pain points as well, that their brand is not consistent through the different products or application. It is also sufficing. Then also it is also required to serve the same thing in different platforms and even different formats. Let's say Android requires a different format, iOS requires a different format. So how to scale everything through the different platforms without having the hard-coded values. And let's say even if there's a change which is required or if there's any error, so we will also need to spend like enough time into identify and correcting those hard-coded values instead of actually using that time into something better. And the most important thing is, even if in some of the design systems also, if it is mentioned, all of those core values, they are presented as a set of options, but not as a set of decisions. So I'll come back to this options versus decisions thing, but just to keep in mind about that. So before we go to the next section, right, let's have like a fun fact / QA thing. So even at Wall Street Journal, they had to update their typeface across their main website as well as the sub brands. So just like a rough guesstimate, how much time or how many people it might have required? Any guesses? And any random guess?
Did it take 2 years to do it?
How do you know? It took 2 years
Oh
and
my
100
god,
people.
I should get a prize now for this.
Yes, you will definitely. It took 2 years and 100 people just to do that. And in some of the instances, they still are using the older typeface. So imagine, even after such a long time and so many people, it is still a core problem which is present. So let's also come to the concept of a headless design system. So it is also connecting to the design tokens. So what is a headless design system? So like thinking about headless design system, it definitely brings and like connects me to something, our very own headless Nick. But that's not it. So yeah, so if we come back to our button as well, right, the most primary element which is present. So button can have its various core properties, like it can have a border color, it can have a border radius, a weight, a font family. All of these comprising, they make a button. It's not like standard or like predefined values which a button inherently has. All of these values make a button. Let's say if you change a color, it becomes a different button. If you change the typeface, or maybe have like a primary or a value, all of those comprise to make a button. Buttons do not have their existing or inherent values to it. So coming back to the concept of a headless design system, so what it actually does, it separates the logic from the component and its visual representation. So that logic behind creating it, it is not hard coded with the actual visual representation of a button, but they are treated as separate entities altogether. So creating this, technically a button doesn't have its own visual representation, but it gathers all those values from the things which are attached to it. So it also makes styling and theming a lot easier. So let's just see how. So here also we see a button, right? I've just like added borders to it just to have a visual representation of it, but the same visual layout or the same structure can be used to create all of these, or maybe any other visual representation as well. So all of this is also possible through a headless design system as well. So instead of like having 3 to 4 buttons altogether, you can just do that with one and apply the different properties you want with it. So this also helps a lot with theming, and if even if a same design system is used across different products or different brands, the common base remains the same. Then only the branding or anything else or the visual attributes which are to be applied, they are updated on it. But the base foundation remains the same, which also makes it consistent even though they are different brands. So even the question arises now, right? Like where did the design tokens even come from? So I think even if we have gone through the similar issues in the previous slide earlier, like everybody would have faced that. So the first, like many people would have faced that as well, but the only people who started something like this was the Salesforce design team as well. So Salesforce design team were the people who came up with this whole concept of design tokens and how to create them, how to implement them, like a whole structure for it. So this was the first use of this term and concept of design tokens. So what they also did is, like, because they also have served many products internally, they also came up with an solution which stored the design decisions which were present in very abstract format as a single source of truth, and not in like hard coded values, but it was also in the form of JSON files which could get translated into different platforms. So this whole process we also have in a detailed format. We'll also go through that. So even before that, like everyone here might be a creator of a design system or a user of design system, or if somebody else has created it and you are using it. So if anyone can tell what are their biggest pain points while using design system, we can also relate how that also can be solved to the design tokens. So like any answers for that, like any points which you have faced till now, might be big, might be small, might be anything.
We actually don't know the list of all the components,
Okay.
like a checklist kind of thing.
Okay.
So we miss sometime like small components like a stepper. Sometimes we miss stepper.
There's also the spacing. Sometimes you don't. I mean, even if you have a design system, you have the components, but when they are put on the screen, you sometimes don't remember what spacing should be there between what, and it's more or less like a guesswork sometimes.
Okay. Okay. Yeah,
And
that's also a good point.
since the design system comprises of like a lot of components and assets, sometimes it is difficult to find like where is what.
Okay, that is also a good point. Yeah, so see, some of the issues are also very much related to, and let's see how, even if we can solve some of them. So, like, what are actually design tokens? So let's go back to our original component set which we had. So now here we have this different hard-coded values as well, right? So instead of that, let's say we have this brand color which is represented here, and we assign it a name as well, let's say $blue. So this is still a key and value pair, which is like a variable, but it is still not a token. So like how and why? So let's see that in maybe 1 or 2 slides. So since it is still not a token, similarly how Max would say I'm still not Ginger. Okay, so even the options point which was presented, let's say you have this color palette maybe from primary 1 to primary 8. And let's say assuming that you are somebody new who has joined this team as well. So how do you identify just by its naming which one to use for the primary button, which one to use for background, which one to use for hover? Just by its naming, or maybe let's say even if not any user is present, you can still not identify it, right? Because these are options and not decisions. So options present the like the whole set which you have, but there's no meaning attached to it. Let's say like the whole design tokens thing is about attaching and humanizing all of these whole process as well, right? Giving it a more human readable format rather than just having maybe just key value pairs, which are still going to cause the same problem. So what are actually design tokens? So design tokens, they represent the design values, but they also give it a decision and a meaning to it rather than just blue or green or text color or border color or anything. And it is also formatted in a way which is comprised as a single source of truth and which can be used across different tools and coding languages. So we currently use Figma. Maybe tomorrow there's some other design tool. There are also different development tools which are being used. There are also different formats. Let's say sometimes we have CSS, sometimes we have JSON. In Android, we need XMLs. Then in iOS, we need also JSON. So how does that same value be formulated and propagated across all of the all of the different platforms and things? So that is also how design tokens would help us. And it also gives the whole thing a human readable name to the primitive values rather than just having an obscure name to it. So this is still an option. And now if we give it a similar, like a much more human readable format name, this is kind of a decision now. Let's say this is, so now it is easily identified by that this is the active color for the background of this button. So this is still allows us to know the meaning for it rather than just $blue. So design tokens are not just about a proper naming convention, though the naming convention is a part of it. Now, let's see how it also fits in the whole atomic system. So I think all the design systems are majorly now using the atomic design system. So can anyone like guess or think and tell where the design tokens would fit in the steps or maybe the level? Anyone? Yes.
Molecule?
Nope.
Atoms?
Nope.
Right at the beginning.
Yep. They're like subatomic values. So just like we have atoms is like nucleus, protons, electrons, quarks, and whatnot. So all of those things are basically like the first starting point, because without this, the whole nothing would also propagate and happen. So now we can also think about, right, let's say we had a few answers, let's say whether they can be atoms, whether they can be molecules. So what actually can be represented with design tokens? So all your basic foundational things, right, which are like colors, your shadows, your radius, opacity, typography, animation, any property which makes like a visual representation or gives it a visual thing to it can be represented by design token. So let's say even if we think about typography, there are like sub elements inside it as well. Right? We can have the font family, the size, weight, spacing, etc. So all of these granular details can also be marked into it. Then maybe even animation, then borders, then spacing. So these are just like examples. There are different properties for this as well. And let's say maybe there can be some more visual property as well. So anything which is at a foundational level can be also created as a design token. Now, what are the different types of design token, right? So let's see this state as well. Now, if we think about in a way, right, let's say if we think about the raw value which is present, which is this one. So the first tier are the global tokens. So what are global tokens? So global tokens, they basically store the most primitive values in it. And they're also like, they just store the value it, but they do not, they're not like generally used somewhere. They are basically inherited by the other two levels of it. So this is just like creating a whole base for it. Now, the next tier is the alias tokens. So what alias tokens do is they refer to the specific values which are also presented by the global tokens. And these are also kind of like references. So let's say if we have this color which is represented by blue 800, which is also the darkness of that color. And this is also similarly associated to the color primary background. So here you might have a question, right? So why not directly use blue 800 for a component? Why create a layer above it as well? So even the reason for it is, right, it also gives a safe net. Let's say if your whole color palette changes, or let's say if you want to introduce new colors, or let's say if you want to have different primary colors for different things. So just by directly connecting these would also change all of them. So it just gives like a safety net, and also can be represented with different things. So the same alias token, right? They can also refer to other things as well. I'll just come to that. And the topmost tier are the component tokens, which are, as their name suggests, which are like very specific to the component which we are referring. And they're only created and made to generally target that component, let's say a button, or maybe an input feed or anything. So at a global level, they are basically in the form of the primitive values. At aliases, we still talk more about the foundational elements, let's say your color, your text, or all those properties which we just saw earlier. And at a component level, they refer specific to each component as well. So if we go a bit detail as well, so even this is how the whole specific, like it narrows down from broader to specific level.
Patty, I just want to ask, so when you say safety net,
Hmm.
So you're talking about, like, for instance, if you have 10 different things that are this particular shade of blue, and you want to change 3 of them
Yeah.
to like pink,
Yeah.
you don't have to just change this value and then or like manually unlink
Yeah.
those 3 and okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So if we also come a bit detail about it, so as global tokens are also present, they store the primitive or the brand core attributes in it as well. Then they're only like definitions, but there's no application at this level yet. And they can be used, but generally, generally they are also used in a way that they are inherited by the alias tokens. They are not generally used at any direct connection. So just like an example, we had blue 800. Then if we also go to the alias tokens, so alias tokens are the ones which are created as a reference to the global tokens as well. And so alias tokens also help to communicate the intended purpose of it rather than just what it stores. Even for alias tokens, right? So let's say if we have this example, which is like our global token, which has been referenced with this alias token, let's say color primary background. So it still gives it a proper intention rather than just having to use this one, which has no meaning to it. And the point which here I mentioned is that it needs careful planning and time also to implement in design and code, is because there can be endless possibilities. There can be endless combinations with all the different foundational elements which you have. But it is up to us, like what the system actually requires, rather than just creating a whole exhaustive list and then not end up using it any. So the way could also be to like create them as and when you go, or let's say if you have already performed a design audit earlier and you have identified a set of places or any issues which you need to tackle. So that is also a way which you can also create them. Then the same global token can also be referenced to different alias tokens as well. Let's say the same is used as background, the same one is used as a link. So that property is also available and present. Now, if we come to the very specific tokens, right, which are like the component tokens. So what they also do is they are like very specific to the components which are created. So maybe you want to represent a component which is like a container or a label text or maybe icons or even maybe the different inputs as well. So at this point of time, what we are doing is like from all the different levels which you went, right, which was like very primitive to like highly specific. So now what we have done is we have like mapped the like the global whole foundation to like a very specific level. So now this is like a pure specific application of it. So just as a few examples, maybe for button primary, we have maybe the color, then similarly for the border, similarly for the width. I know that this list might seem a bit exhaustive or maybe even seem a bit too much, but like as and when it is created, it does serve a purpose for it. Then you also might have seen that there are like multiple levels to even naming that particular token as well. So like what is the actual format and manner for it? So even when I was learning about even the design token, so what also I came across was there was like multiple naming conventions for it. There was no one standard guideline for it. However, still W3C is still working for a total standardization way and module where they are coming up with a whole solution for it, where even the naming conventions, how they should be created, or even how they should be used between design and code. So that is something which is being worked upon. But till then, we have also like here consolidated different kinds of options, I might say, how you can name the tokens, because there's no one size fit all solution, right? It would depend on the product which you have. It would depend on the scale at which your system is, or even what your use case is. So we do not need to go at all the depth and all the level, but we need to identify how for us it would be useful. So if you also go about the different levels as well, right? So the first level is also the namespace. So this is like a very global, like a topmost thing which is present, which is the namespace. So generally, even when small teams are working with it, they do not use this kind of thing. It is also mainly used by, let's say, which are like very big and distributed teams or systems as well. So what even namespace comprises of? So it also comprises of different things such as system, theme, and domain. So what they essentially are as well. So let's say system. So generally, let's say you might have also come across even in design systems where these foundational elements are also having a prefix of the design system name. Sometimes even design systems have their own name with it. So let's say if the creator or they want to also have it in a way that they also want to attach the name to it. Even the system is a system is a space where you can also use an acronym of that particular design system to label it. Then if we talk about theme, so how even theme would be, right? So let's say if there's a brand which also has like sub brands inside it. So let's say even if there are like a major product which is there and major brand which is there, and there are like sub A, B, C different things. So all of these A, B, C things, they would have their own branding as well. They wouldn't have like a common consistent throughout. So this theme is also used to like modularize all of these things at a broader level. And if needed or if required, there's one more hierarchy which is present in the namespace, which is like the domain, if there are any like children inside the theme as well. So like all of these or all the different steps also which we present, right? So they are not like compulsory as it is, but they can be used as and when they are also required, or if they are required. The second the second level would be naming it as an object. So what object actually comprises of? So let's say a group or a component or an element. So what a group is? So a group is like a group of components, which is it's like a parent of this component. So let's say if you talk about a form. So form is a group, right? It has different components inside it. It can have different input fields. It can have different actions. So it is like a whole reusable group or a whole reusable group which is present, which can be also labeled as it is. Then component, as its name presents, it's like an individual component, maybe a button, maybe an input, which is like which has its individual function as well. And element is something which is still a subset of the component. Let's say if you have a button, so you can have a button with an icon and a label, or an input field with an icon and a label, or maybe a checkbox or a check tick. So all of those are like still sub elements of that component, which can also be in that level. So same way, just like namespace, not all of them are compulsory. These are just like the different options or different combinations which are possible, and they can be used as per the whole system requires. Then the third one is the base. So as its name suggests, it is the backbone of all the different tokens which can be generated. So it also comprises and talks about the different categories or the different concepts or the different properties. So what they actually are. So what a category can be is like all our foundational elements, right, which are like our color, our type, our spacing, opacity, and everything. So this is like a like this like a parent thing which can comprise of all those foundational elements. Now, there's also one step between between the category and the property, which is called the concept. So this is also an optional thing if we want to use, but what concepts generally represent are, they generally represent maybe, let's say if you want to use something for a feedback, which is like a message or a notification, or maybe an alert, or maybe a kind of particular kind of action, or even if at the end it is a property. So let's say what are the different properties. So as we also saw earlier in the whole what type of design to what also entities are possible in the design tokens. For fonts we had the weight, the size, the line height, etc. So all of those are also comprised in the property. And the last one are modifiers as well. So as their name suggests, so let's say if it is a variant, so let's say if you also have a button which is like the primary or the secondary, or let's say the next one is also the state, which let's say it can be hover, it can be normal, it can be active. Then for scale, if you're talking about, so let's say if we take the example of spacing, we also have this different we follow a different scale, right? Let's say if we follow the 8 multiplier or the 4 multiplier, so all of the different scales they can also represent. Just like if you think about the t-shirt sizes, which is like small, medium, large, which are like predefined. So then that way also we can store the similar thing which can be denoted in the form of a scale. Or let's say if we take the example of color, so if we have a whole palette which is ranging from its lightness to darkness 0 to 100, or the different between steps between it. So this is how also we can denote and identify and add that particular modifier in the whole token name. And the last one is the mode as well. So I think now even design systems are also made in a way which suffice or are interchangeable between the light mode and the dark mode as well. The theme and everything remains the same, but the mode on which it is sitting about changes. So like the last one is also an optional one which is present if you're also having those systems about the dark mode and the light mode as well. Now, if you also talk about the design tokens, tools and processes, right? So up till now, what we saw was like how to create them, what they are, and what kind of things can be created as a design token as well. But this is still a bit abstract, like how is the actual application for it? So currently, since even all the design tools which you are using, they natively do not support design tokens, because I think these design tools are not yet at that level. But I think in future there might be. So even Figma is working on having the design tokens as a native thing inside the tool as well. But obviously it's going to take some time. But meanwhile, since we have already started working on this whole concept and everything, so how can we also do that between the design and development as well? So currently there are some different tools. So let's say which allow us to like also store these values. So as I mentioned earlier as well, these design tokens are also represented as a single source of truth. So what does that mean as well? So it also represents how all those values, they are also presented and stored in a single space, which are then used by multiple applications or multiple platforms. So these are like some various tools. So like even if we go about like how each tool works, that would also require a separate session for it, because like everything has a different, every tool might have a different flow about it as well. So now even some like design system documentation tools, let's say Supernova or Zero Height, they are also allowing an inbuilt capability of adding your design tokens in it. So which also helps with the documentation. Like even your documentation stays in the same place along with the design tokens. And there are also other tools such as Specify and Style Dictionary. But the one thing which is only present, which also combines Figma like in the most possible way, is the Figma tokens plugin as well. So this has also been created recently as well, and I think it has also been used by like many people and their teams as well, which is the inbuilt, not the inbuilt one, but the token plugins as well. So this is also a tool which allows you to create and like establish a design tokens as well. So if you think about in Figma, so in Figma we store the different color styles, the text styles, opacity, or even the drop shadows and everything. So this tool also helps to like import those styles and then create a tokenized version out of it, which is like in a JSON format as well, which is also stored. So we'll also go through that process as well about how it gets from Figma to the actual implementation. But like even in some of these tools can be tried out as well and used. So the whole flow which we were talking about right now, that how it can be used as well. So if you think about a whole design decision which is created in the form of token as well, so which is then even passed out to a design token generator. So some companies they have like built their own design token generators, but till then we can also use these Figma tokens plugin. And what it also allows, it allows you to connect that particular library to a git as well, so which also creates a whole repository of this stuff, and all of these are exported by that plugin within the JSON or YML format as well. So since that whole format is also represented, and now with the whole preprocessor, whichever that particular application uses, let's say for web, we can have these particular formats, or maybe for iOS, we would need these particular formats, or similarly, even for Android. So now you see how the whole flow happens, that a singular decision which is stored in this particular value gets translated and transformed in this particular entities as well. So just the same way, this particular format will be then translated into the web app, and then this particular will be translated into the iOS app, similarly in the Android app. So this is how even the same thing would be used as well. Now, just to like have a closing note or end of it, let's see how much also this has been understood as well. So we can also think about, I think this rhyme would be very much known by many people. I hope I don't have to give a hint. Like roses are
Red.
Red.
no, they are not red. They are flower red 500.
I'm not designer, no, that's why.
It's okay. Okay, next chance. Violets are
Purple.
okay. No, they are not.
Violet.
Okay, last thing. Design tokens are sweet, and so are you. So
Oh, thank you.
okay, that's all, folks.
Wow, colors are never going to be the same again.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Someone has a question.
what about the presentation.